All right, so let's talk about your image file type, whether you're going to shoot in RAW or JPEG. So RAW is the data that your camera captures from the sensor when you take a photo. So it's kind of like undeveloped film in that it's not a finished image yet. It's not a photo that's ready to be printed, and you can't even open it if you don't have a RAW processor. Common RAW processors would be the software called Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, which comes with the Bridge program. If you've got either of those, then you can shoot in RAW and you can open those files and turn them into photos. If you don't have a way to process them, you'll be frustrated because you can't open those files. So you actually need a way to open the RAW files before you can edit them and process them. To shoot in RAW, you need to select the RAW setting on your camera, and you cannot go backwards from JPEG to RAW. So once you've shot in JPEG, it's a JPEG. You cannot go backwards. So essentially, a RAW file is uncompressed and unprocessed. It's just data. You can see a preview of the image when you look at it on your viewfinder or when you upload it to the computer. You can see what it looks like, but you need to actually edit it and process it and save it as a JPEG before you can print it or send it to someone else, that kind of thing. Because it has so much information and it's all the data used to create an image, the file sizes are much bigger, but you can actually do a lot more with them. And to illustrate this today, I went out and just took some random pictures, and I'm going to show you one of them. I shot it on my camera with the setting RAW plus JPEG, so it shot the exact same picture in both RAW and JPEG. And so here I'm going to show you the RAW version that I shot, and I purposely picked a tricky lighting situation. So you guys will understand all the lighting stuff more later, but I just want to show you a quick preview of how RAW gives you so much more editing capabilities because of all of that data that's in a RAW file. So if you look at this image on the left, you've got the RAW file as shot. You've got bright snow in front of a dark building, which is in front of a bright sky. That's a really tricky lighting situation to get nice detail and to get nice balanced color. And on the right, you'll see that I took that RAW image and I edited it, and I was able to bring back the details in the snow. I was able to bring up the exposure for the building and didn't lose the detail in the building's shadows or in the snow's highlights. That's just one way that you are going to gain power over your images by shooting RAW, is you're going to have a lot more control over the highlights and the shadows and that kind of thing. When you shoot JPEG, you're shooting a finalized image. Can you edit a JPEG? Yes, but you don't have the same control over a JPEG as you do over a RAW file. If you're going to shoot a JPEG, like I just showed you, that RAW file that I shot, which is a very dark and underexposed building. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. But if you're going to shoot that in a JPEG, when you go to edit it and bring up the lights, bring up the exposure, affect the highlights and the shadows and that kind of thing, you're going to lose detail. So what happens is in your camera, when you're shooting JPEG, it's taking all the same information that it takes to create a RAW file, but it's then compressing that image and processing that image into a finished JPEG, which is a pixel image, and it's essentially just evaluating what it thinks the best finished product is going to be as far as exposure and white balance and that kind of thing. JPEG files take up so much less space. They are compressed images, so they're not taking up all the space that a RAW file does, but as I mentioned, you have a lot less control over editing them compared to what you have with a RAW file. So on the left, you've got the JPEG version of what I shot earlier. Remember, I told you I set a setting in my camera where I could shoot a RAW and a JPEG at the same time, so I got two files with one snapshot, and this is the JPEG version of that. When I went to edit it in Photoshop, because you can't do camera raw processing on a JPEG the same way you can to a RAW file, I had to pull it into Photoshop, and I did similar edits to this file as to what I did to the RAW, and look at what happened. You lost all the detail in the snow. The white balance is wonky. It just doesn't look that good. And I wasn't able to save this image as a JPEG the way I was able to save the raw file. To show you comparison of the two, here are my final edits. On the left, you see the final edit of the raw file that I shot. And on the left, you see the final edit of the JPEG. So what should you shoot, RAW or JPEG? Well, let's just break it down real quickly. When you're shooting RAW, you're going to have much larger files than when you're shooting JPEG. So if that's important to you to have smaller file sizes, shoot JPEG. No big deal. RAW is going to retain more detail in the highlights and in the shadows. It's also going to give you more color detail for more accurate colors. And it's going to give you a lot more control over adjusting things when you botch it. So like if you're shooting a wedding and you're a professional wedding photographer, you're probably shooting RAW, because if you were to botch a shot during a wedding, let's say you accidentally way overexpose the wedding vows, okay, and you've got just like white pictures. If you're shooting RAW, you can pull those files into your RAW processor and bring back the detail and the color. Whereas if you shot that in JPEG, you can just kiss that shot goodbye. You're not going to get a nice edited image out of that shot because the data is not there anymore. It's already compressed and decided what it thought the best version of that image would be. RAW is going to require processing, where JPEG is ready to go, although a lot of people like editing their JPEGs, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just remember, you're not going to have the same kind of control over the JPEG as you do over your RAW image. So I think that when it comes down to it, there is no which is better. It depends on what you are doing and what your application is. Use JPEG if you just want to shoot a ton of pictures, or you don't want to spend a lot of time editing your photos, or you need to save space, or you don't have a way to process RAW files. Definitely shoot JPEG. But if you're shooting like once in a lifetime events, like a wedding or some other important family event, shoot RAW. You're going to want to have total control over those images and getting back details if by chance you botch the shot. Also, by shooting RAW, you have more control over the end product, but you also are able to remove things like noise, bring back more clarity. You just have so much more control. Now, an example that I will share is that when I'm like traveling, I would way prefer to shoot RAW because I want to make sure I've got beautiful images when I come home to edit and process. But if I'm running low on storage space on my memory card, I'll just pop it over to JPEG because it's more important to me to get a lot of pictures when I'm traveling with my family, right? That said, if I'm at a wedding and I'm the wedding photographer, I'm going to keep it in RAW and I'm just going to pack a ton of memory cards because I can't risk running out of space and not shooting in RAW in that application.